It's time to defend our title as the Best Science and Medicine podcast. The podcast award nominations start July 1st, so we need you listeners to get DNA Today nominated at podcastawards.com. DNA Today has won for the past 2 years, and this September we are celebrating 10 years of DNA Today. All of this is because of your support, and we are so grateful to have such an incredible listener base, including you. We have been up against popular podcasts with huge production companies, which is why as a small independent podcast, we rely on each and every one of you to get nominated and hopefully win again for the third time. So please go to podcastawards.com and select DNA Today in the Science and Medicine category. Pause the show now. I swear it takes 30 seconds to do it. Podcastawards.com, DNA Today in the Science and Medicine category. Thank you oh so much.
How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
Hi, you're listening to DNA Today, a podcast and radio show where we discover new advances in the world of genetics. From genetic technology like CRISPR to rare diseases to new research, we have you covered. For a decade, DNA Today has brought you the voices of leaders in genetics. I'm Keira Deneen. I'm a certified genetic counselor and your host. Y'all asked, and we are going to answer some of our most popular episodes on DNA Today are about the genetic counseling application process. So we're doing a Q&A about it in this episode. So if you want even more insight about genetic counseling, grad apps, and preparing for the first year, check out episodes 87, 97, 101, and 155. Those are our most popular for that. But anyway, joining me are two lovely guests to have this conversation. The first guest I have is Mikayla Stoecker. She is the founder and CEO of GC Prep, where she supports GC applicants, students, and recent grads. Janelle Villiers is an assistant program director as well as an alumni of the Sarah Lawrence College Genetic Counseling Program. And she is also co-owner of GC Prep. So thank you so much for coming on and going through genetic counseling grad school, because that's like our bread and butter.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Yes, we're really happy to be here.
Yes, we both all three of us nerd out about this a lot. And what's cool about this episode, so usually for listeners, longtime listeners of the show, you probably have guessed by now, I usually prep a couple questions ahead of time, think about what do I want to talk about? What do I want to pull out of this person's brain and learn from them? But this time, you guys asked all the questions. So all of the questions were submitted by listeners like you who are applying or planning on applying to genetic counseling graduate schools. So be sure to follow us on social media. Just search DNA Today with the green logo, and then you can have the opportunity to ask questions on future episodes. And we also do a lot of giveaways on there, so a lot of reasons to follow us. But anyway, we have a lot of questions and a short amount of time. So I think, are you guys good just to get into it?
Let's go. Let's do it. Let's go.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start with a question that most people sent in. So at least 5 people sent in this question. So shout out to Hannah, Molly, Emily, Rachna, and Crystal. Hope I pronounced everyone's names right. So kind of blurred all of these questions together. So as a high school or college student, what activities or classes should a person get involved in that stand out on applications or provide the experience and information necessary to be a successful genetic counselors? So also including, because GC shadowing, I'm assuming is going to be one of your answers, so I'll already take that out. I'll say shadowing, because people also want to know what else outside of shadowing, how can people make their apps stronger? So I figured this starts out our conversation nicely. So either of you want to start out answering?
So
yeah, I mean,
yes.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Janelle.
No.
I
was like,
so much excitement,
Mikayla has. No. I was gonna say, so Mikayla has the list. Go ahead.
All right, just kidding, Mikayla, go for it.
I'm going. Okay. Anything that you can do related to genetic counseling, of course, that's a given, right? But other activities that are related to leadership, to volunteering, activities that kind of require you to view the world from another's perspective, I would say. So it's hard to give a list because there are so many things that could fit that, right? You could volunteer at a soup kitchen. You could, you know, care for people at a retirement home and like sit with them and talk with them about their lives. You could actually be shadowing with a genetic counselor. There are so many things you can do. And we do, of course, encourage you to do as many of those things as possible for as long as possible. But I think it's important for people to know that there's no one formula of success for like what experiences you have, okay? It's not about what you have done, it's about what you have taken away from that and your ability to articulate that when it comes to interviews and your essays. So for me, like, I don't really care what your actual experience was in its facts, but take me to that place with you in your thought process. Take me to that place of what was happening with your emotions right then. How did that time and those experiences change your life, change your perspective, change how you view the world? That is far more important than having exactly the right experiences to list on your resume. And that, I think, is also where people can get tripped up when it does come to the application process. They're so concerned about listing factually what has prepared them for genetic counseling grad school that they're missing the insight, the emotional process that shows that they will be a successful counselor.
What did you take away from the experience? What skills did you sharpen? What do you start realizing? This is an important skill I've started to learn on, but you want to get that even better in grad school.
For sure.
Janelle, what else do you have to add to the list?
So I actually totally agree with Mikayla, and I was going to give a question that perhaps people can ask themselves as they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, what volunteer work they're looking at. And the question is what I'm doing supporting somebody during a challenging time, whether it's crisis or just some challenging time that they're handling? She gave 2 good examples already that aren't necessarily like a crisis text line or a crisis hotline, which we see all the time. But it could be being a resident assistant, right? So an RA, you deal with people who have challenges, and how do you support them? So if whatever it is that you're looking at, if you ask the question, am I supporting people during a difficult time or during a challenge, then you're probably on the right track. And starting as early as you can, like Mikayla said, is actually really great, because if you start right before you submit your application, like it's like, oh, okay, this person is just doing it just to check it off. But if you start doing it much earlier and people read your application and see that you've been doing it for a year, 2 years, 3 years, even more, then we understand that this is something that you really enjoy, you even find fulfilling, and is in alignment with what people do as genetic counselors. And so if you can do that earlier, the better. And everything that Mikayla said is spot on.
And Janelle, just to piggyback on that, the longer you can do it, the more settled you will get, and the more insightful and profound experiences you'll be able to pull from it, right? Because if you've had like 2 months of doing this crisis work or helping people or whatever, like, yay, right? Good for you for doing 2 months. But also, just with the time, have you been presented with enough situations? Have you, had that one thing that really like kind of took you back and demanded more processing? And so the more time you can give yourself, the more experiences you'll gain, the more options you'll have to talk about in your essay, to review in your interviews, to have to really reflect for yourself, like, yes, this is something that I'm enjoying, or no, people tell me about their problems and I feel for them, but I want to get away from that, right? That's important information for you to have before you become a genetic counselor.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, in that it's as valuable to know careers you don't want to do as the careers you do want to do. So I think for my own experience, I was like, I could work in a lab, and I had that experience, and I was still planning on being a genetic counselor, but my time in the lab was great. I learned a lot that I brought into genetic counseling, it's so easy when I call labs. I'm like, oh, I know what they're talking about when they say this and this happened. but also that as I was in the lab, it validated for me, I really want to be a genetic counselor because I want to meet these patients that I'm working on the samples for. So it was so valuable to have that time because I'm like, I'm really seeing that a lab is not a good fit for me like it is other people. So I think that's a really good point too. And that the earlier you can get involved, the better. I think one example for me too was I got involved with a grief camp. So kids that experience a loss of a loved one that's close to them, usually a parent or sibling. And I got involved a couple years before I applied to grad schools, and I'm still involved with camp now. So it's an annual camp, and it's just like every year I feel like I gain more from the experience, and it helps my counseling in terms of genetic counseling. So I think that's all really good points with that of it's the quality, it's not necessarily the quantity. In terms of your experience and how you can speak to that in interviews and pulling out certain stories or instances and skills and be specific in terms of the interviews. PerkinElmer Genomics is a global leader in genetic testing, focusing on rare diseases, inherited disorders, newborn screening, and hereditary cancer. Testing services support the full continuum of care from preconception and prenatal to neonatal, pediatric, and adult. Testing options include sequencing for targeted genes, multiple genes, the whole exome or genome, and copy number variations. Using a simple saliva or blood sample, PerkinElmer Genomics answers complex genetic questions that can proactively inform patient care and end the diagnostic odyssey for families. Learn more at PerkinElmerGenomics.com. Wait, you're still drawing pedigrees by hand? Hold up, in 2022? Don't worry, I have a solution for you. Phenotyp's complete solution for medical genetics not only has an intuitive pedigree drawing tool, allowing you to capture complete family history 2.5 times faster than pen and paper, it has a pre-visit patient questionnaire that auto-draws your patient's pedigree, customizable into multiple languages. On top of pedigrees that draw themselves, Phenotypes is the leading software solution for the representation of trans and queer individuals in pedigrees. Capture pronouns, same-gender couples, and assign sex at birth separately from gender in pedigrees, as well as in digital patient intake forms. Because a pedigree is more than just a tool to capture family history, it's your patient's first impression, and all patients deserve to feel respected and affirmed. Your practice is in 2022, so shouldn't your genetic software be too? See Phenotype software for yourself. You can book a short demo at phenotypes.com. Again, find them at phenotypes.com. Oh, and check out episodes 189 and 190 of DNA Today. Both episodes feature Phenotypes conversations about gender-affirming care in genetic counseling, including pedigree building. Another question along these lines with the shadowing of genetic counselors, how much shadowing is a good amount? Which I know there's not going to be a straightforward answer to this. Burn Abe asked this question. I mean, ballpark, like what do you guys like to see? Janelle, especially for you being someone that's reading genetic counseling applications.
So there's not like a cap on this. It's not like you're like, oh, I've reached my limit.
Oh, you hit this number, you're done.
You're done. Exactly. So I just want to set that up or say that up front. And then having one interview is just not enough. I don't know how else to say that. That's like as plain as I can say. And I get it that like, it's tough to get access to genetic counselors. It's certainly, to that end, has been difficult, even before COVID, to get shadowing. But it's just as much, like it needs to be clear that you have tried as best as you can to try to get as much exposure to genetic counselors as possible. So even listening to this podcast, there are so many different genetics experts, patients, genetic counselors that Kira interviews. So like listening to this podcast is helpful because it's putting you in exposure to genetic counselors. Like I said, the informational interviews, amazing. You're taking people outside of their work so they have a little bit more downtime. Maybe you even like meet them up for coffee. Like maybe you could do that in person if you can't get inside of their
Genetic
office.
counselors like coffee.
Yeah,
buy us a coffee.
Exactly. And you can have a great conversation. You know, it doesn't always have to be on Zoom, but if they're not in your city or state, like Zoom is definitely a way that we all know how to communicate with. So I highly encourage you to just access as many things as you can. Webinars, podcasts, book clubs, journal clubs, the interviews, and then of course shadowing is kind of like the gold standard. So as much as you can, I understand that many of you are working, you're trying to fit this in your life, and so it's just trying to, it needs to be obvious that you're trying to do as much as you can. So 1 isn't enough. I will say that. 2, 3, 4, okay, you're probably getting to a place now where we feel like, okay, they've definitely been trying. And the other thing I want to say is that you're not in a vacuum. So whatever was okay, this is like healthcare. Whatever price was okay in healthcare, now it's like so much more because everybody just keeps
Inflation.
bumping it up. Right, exactly. So it's the same thing. What used to be okay, maybe you shadowed one genetic counselor, is not okay because everyone else is now shadowing more than one, interviewing more than one, going to more than one webinar. So it would be great if you could gain insight from one genetic counselor. If you gained amazing insight and all it took was one, that would be awesome. But people will question if you really do have the insight, and you'd have to be extremely eloquent in your personal statement in order to draw that out. So it would be in your best interest, I would say, at the minimum, 4 interviews, but it really is because so many people are doing so many other things. So just as much as you can.
Yeah, and I think as Janelle mentioned too, like I've seen more and more people writing on their applications, like listen to this podcast, join this virtual event. And so I think that's good to write on your resume too, because it shows that you're involved. Mikayla, what else would you have to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those things are good. When obviously try to get the actual like legit shadowing experience, and if you can't, then all of those other things definitely do as much as possible because they're a little bit easier to get, those counselor interviews. But when, again, like what you said, quality versus quantity as well, right, when it comes to shadowing. So we've seen people who were genetic counseling assistants for years. So they've had tons of shadowing experience, and others that maybe they got like 2 days of shadowing. And it's not like one is inherently better than the other, because it depends on what you got out of it and how you can articulate what you got out of it, right? So potentially the GCA for a couple years is going to have more experiences, and hopefully they'd be able to have a good answer for, well, what is genetic counseling to you? Why do you want to be a genetic counselor? Why do you think you're a good fit? You absolutely should have excellent answers to those questions when you go into interviews. But someone who shadowed for a couple days and really spent a lot of time thinking about the things that they saw and how the counselor reacted and how the patient reacted and why things happened the way they did, and were introspective about how they were feeling about things, and have done their research on genetic counseling, can have an excellent answer as well. So don't feel like if you're not able to get like a 1-month shadowing situation lined up, you're not in a bad spot. Okay, you just need to really think about what you were able to find, what you were able to listen to, the counselors you were able to talk to, and be really insightful about that information.
Yeah, certainly. And moving on to our next question from Maya, what factors were important to you when you were narrowing down what schools to apply to? So not necessarily just you guys, but in terms of what tips you have, because there's 40 plus programs in North America, so there is a lot to choose from. What are some of the factors? Yeah. 55 plus? Oh my, every time I say it, it's more. So for perspective, people, I was applying, let's see, I enrolled 2018. So I started applying fall of 2017. There were 37 programs at that time when I was applying. 5 years later, we now have 55 programs.
Yeah. I think there were like 33 when I was applying.
Yeah. Wow. But anyway, Mikayla, start us out.
Yeah.
Yes. So historically, before GC Prep came around, which was last September, the way that people filtered was by location, right? Because the only thing we had was a list of the schools by state in alphabetical order. And so you kind of picked like, what state is acceptable to me? Where do I want to be? And then you kind of did some manual digging beyond that. And so for me, when I was picking, I was like, well, where do where do I want to be? I knew I wanted to be in a big city. And then I also looked at finances. And those were my like 2 filters that I had when I was picking. Now, there's so much more that I should have considered and that I didn't even know to consider. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with GC Prep is make that filtering process much easier. So we developed the program map. So on our website, it's totally free to use, but you can go there and you can select from a bunch of different filters to look at different programs. So obviously by location, like if you want to be East Coast, or if you want to be below the Mason-Dixon line, or if you want to be, in Canada, all of those things you can filter, but you can also filter by program size. Like how many classmates do you want to have? I did well in a small program. Other people are super social and they want to be able to choose their friends and ignore other people, which is fine. So large programs are better for those. You can filter by the cost of the program, by if there's financial aid available, by the city, by so many other things that I hadn't considered when I was selecting a program. And, we compiled that data off of the program's websites, and it's about time for us to update it again this year, because the schools will be updating their websites again in the next couple of months. But the goal of all of that and providing this map is for people to be able to consider a program that they wouldn't necessarily have considered, by location only. And we actually have a whole video on this. It's probably about 25 minutes just on how to select a program and all the things to consider, and what kind of location you want to be in. Some of these programs are remote, some of them are in person, some are hybrid. Everyone needs something different, and there's just so many ways to pick programs, and that map can help you kind of filter what's going to be best for you.
I so wish I had this when I was applying, because I still have it.
It's so cool. I'm so proud of this map.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. And it's just like, I had this massive spreadsheet, and I was like, I knew for me, I wanted to stay in the Northeast. I didn't want to go too far from Connecticut, where I'm from, and went to undergrad. So for me, it was like, okay, this is my list of schools. Like, how many do I want to apply to? But I still looked at all these things. Money was a big factor for me. I'm like, the degree's the same everywhere. So I don't want to spend $20,000 more to school. That was my mindset, my personal viewpoint. I know, Janelle, you were saying you also wish you had this when you were applying to school. I still would have ended up at Sarah Lawrence, but like the process was important for me. Right. What else would you consider? I mean, Mikayla gave us a really good overview.
I have nothing to add. I wish I had the map.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Wish I had. We're just, fangirling over the map. Perfect. Imagine a health record system that's actually designed for genomics, available in different languages and complete with pedigree drawing, diagnostic insights, and more. Well, stop imagining and start using, because Phenotyps is nothing like your EHR. It's the world's most complete solution for medical genetics that captures family history seamlessly, even respectfully representing trans and queer individuals in pedigrees. Visit phenotyps.com to learn more. Did you know PerkinElmer Genomics was one of the first laboratories to offer whole genome sequencing on a clinical basis? Whole genome sequencing can maximize clinical diagnostic yield for patients. With turnaround time of 4 weeks for the proband sample, PerkinElmer's whole genome sequencing test is designed to provide access to additional valuable information compared to an exome. PerkinElmer also offers prenatal whole genome sequencing as well as ultra-rapid whole genome sequencing for critically ill newborns using dried blood spots. The ultra-rapid genome has a turnaround time of 5 days and includes mito, chromosomal CNV analysis, STR-TNR screening, and biochemical analysis. Also, listen back to episode 176 with Dr. Madhuri Hegde, where we explored the power of whole genome sequencing, which also happens to be one of my favorite episodes of DNA Today. And stay tuned for a couple more episodes with PerkinElmer soon. Discover all that PerkinElmer Genomics has to offer at PerkinElmerGenomics.com. All right, Janelle, I think this is a good question for you. This comes from Hope. How common are campus visits in grad school? How do you recommend setting one up? Is this a thing? Because I never went on a campus visit. I went to campuses and just walked around and was like, I'm pretty sure, the genetic counseling grad school is in here, but I didn't talk to anybody.
So we now live in a new world. So what is it like now, given COVID considerations and things of that nature? most programs are doing all of the interviews in person, over Zoom, no longer in person is what I meant to say. And so because of that, what people used to do is in-person interviews, they would then receive a tour. And so that has been taken away. And so I think people are still trying to get that feel. Like, I want to make my decision based more on just the interview itself. Like, now that you get to like lay out your top school, your second school, right? Like, sometimes the feel of the school, like the physical feel of the school, will help people determine their rank order list. So I get
that was important to me.
Yeah. No. So I get that. The reality is, you can reach out. Every program is going to be a little bit different in how they handle this. Some will say, come on campus. There's like a by phone kind of like walk around the campus, and you can just like tune in on your phone and get some information. Some will say, sure, let us know when you're going to come and we'll be here. Some might be a combination of the two, and some may just say flat out, no, we don't do those anymore. So you'll just have to check in with the program.
And it's not weird to interview an admissions director or something to say, do you offer that? Like, that's not weird if someone interviews that, right? That's fine.
Of course. They can totally ask that because most institutions that have graduate programs in genetic counseling, it's not the only graduate program that they have. So you have to understand that institution as a whole has been trying to figure this out for everybody, undergrad students, graduate students, like, what's going on? Like, what are we doing? So everybody's put a system in place. And if that's really important for you, definitely ask. The worst thing they could say is, sorry, we're just not doing that. That's the worst. But like,
right.
Just ask.
I think, Janelle, comment on this if you want to, but I think if you are going to try to contact the administration of a program and get them involved in your tour rather than just showing up and doing kind of your own self-led tour, then I would probably do it after you have an interview scheduled with them, either around the time of your interview or after, to consider it. I don't know if I would recommend doing it now before you've even applied, just because there were over 2,000 applicants last time, and schools would get more than some of them. I know Boston University got more than 400 applications last year. So imagine if 400 people emailed that program director. Yeah,
that's a whole month just answering people. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Mikayla. I think once you have an interview somewhere and you're like, okay, this is in the running where I'm going to be ranking, then in the match system.
Maybe.
Okay, I like that. That's really good. Yeah, and I think back when I was applying, I think there was like in-person open houses, and so things were different. So it's like now we're adjusting to this new part. I have a couple questions on personal statement. Are you shocked? I doubt it. So our first question comes from Leah. She asks, advice on how to craft a personal statement. So this is like the essay that you write that goes with your application for those that don't know. I feel like I have a lot I could talk about, but it's hard to narrow down. So general advice on personal statement. Mikayla, did you want to start us out?
I do. Yeah. I mean, this question realistically takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to answer.
Yes. So it's going to be like abridged and just like the elevator pitch version.
Right. And we, again, our video on how to craft your statement of purpose, which kind of walks people through, here's the brainstorming process, here's how to come up with your stuff, here's how to focus this, here's how to pick your structure. That whole video is 35 to 40 minutes alone. So this is Spark Notes right now. Okay. So for your statement, most people's, when I read them at the beginning, are like, they don't have a focal point. So you need to have some type of structure for you to follow in your paper, and that'll help keep you focused and help the reader follow a coherent narrative. And so there are many ways to do this. I recommend one of 4 ways. Okay. So first of all, you can focus on your strengths, right? So things, provide examples that have shown your strengths, how you developed them, are insightful about how that can be impactful to the field of genetic counseling. But for some people, they may not have a lot of strengths that they can think of right at the beginning, right? And so for some people, it is best to focus on their weaknesses and how they identified them and the progress that they've made. And that is turning a weakness into a strength, right? Look at my growth. is kind of the theme of that. And so that's
we love seeing growth on applications.
Acceptable, totally acceptable way to do it. Another thing you can focus your essay on is like a pivotal, like turning point in your life that either made it so that genetic counseling was like the clearly obvious choice for you, or it like really defined for you how important good health care is, or some like moment where you were one way and now you're a different way that's potentially related to medicine or helping other people, supporting other people, that you can relate back to the methods of counseling and the methods that we use in GC. And then finally, if you don't have any of those things, which everybody has strengths and weaknesses, so you do, but if you're really stuck, then lessons from your crisis work, right? And so you can kind of focus on your crisis experience and really define, here's what happened, here's what I learned, here's how I grew. And so everyone can find at least one of those 4 structures to center their essay on. But it's important going in, when you're starting to write your essay, to go in with a structure in mind, or else we're all just like, I want to get everything in there. But the most important thing is do not regurgitate your CV.
I was going to say that. I get that all the time.
In written form. That's not it. Right?
I'm like, I see your CV and you turn it into an essay. That's not what a personal statement is. No. Just throw that out and start over. It's tough, but it's true.
Yep.
Tough love.
Anything else to add, Janelle, for that?
No, I have a lot more to say for my re-applicants, and I know that question is coming up, so I will save my comments for that.
Then let's get into it. So Ashley asked, for re-applicants, I love the transition. How should you showcase growth between app cycles? What advice do you have for Ashley and everybody else that's reapplying? Because I have to say, before you answer, there were so many people in my genetic counseling class that were second-time applicants, and I was shocked by that. And I was like, there's so much. I feel like their application was stronger than mine, or I feel like they're a much better genetic counselor than I am. So definitely want to say people should reapply. If you feel like this career is for you, please reapply. But sorry, take it away. That's my soapbox.
I agree with everything that you just said, 100%. What I will add is that by being a reapplicant, there is an expectation that you will have more insight this go around about what genetic counseling is than when you first applied. So we love reapplicants because, right, this is a physical demonstration of your desire, passion, and drive to become a genetic counselor. But also understand the other side of that coin is that there's going to be an expectation that you have better insight. And so I figured out a way in which people can determine if they are gathering more insights, and that's by asking 3 questions: what, how, and why. The what is the superficial. It's the just the surface stuff, which is where people stop usually, right? So for example, the what might be the genetic counselor saw a patient, identified that there was testing that could be performed, and then facilitated testing. The how, however, is the genetic counselor spoke to the patient empathically at one point, more educationally at another, and identified 2 emotions that the patient had that were addressed. And then did identify that there was testing and figured out which one would be the best one for that patient, right? That's the how. So now you're getting a little bit deeper. The why is the sweet spot, when you can figure out why are they doing what they're doing. Why did they decide to be empathic in one area, but then speak more in a more kind of educational tone later? Why did they decide to address 2 of the emotions that the patient had? Why was that important for the genetic counselor? Why did they use a particular word? That's my favorite. Personally, I love word choice. So like, I never would have thought of using that word, right?
Most counselors do.
Right, see, yes. I never would have thought about using that word. Why did they decide to use that, right? Why did they decide to use that particular lab for testing? Is it because there's a contract that the institution has with that laboratory? Is it because that's the insurance, or it's because of insurance that led them to choose that lab? Once you start asking those 3 questions, I feel like people will start to gain information that gets to that insight. And then it's up to you to be able to take the insight that you have gotten. And I think once you have it, it's easier to organically talk about it in your personal statement and in your interviews, because you'll start to recognize the things that get you excited, the things that you get really passionate about once you have the why, and just talk about how, like, man, I can't wait to be in a training program that helps me figure out word choice, because I really feel like that's a skill that I see myself using as a genetic counselor. Or, one of the things that I recognize is in my volunteer work, I was able to identify this particular characteristic that I have that I recognized in the genetic counselor when the genetic counselor was dealing with this particular patient. I can't wait to see myself doing that in the profession, or I feel like that's why this profession makes the most sense to me, or something to that effect. But talking about the why is really what's going to get you guys, but you can't really get there until you figure out the what and the how. So that's what I have to say about that. Insight is important for reapplicants. That's what shows your growth, and like what you've done, what you've accomplished is you've gained insight.
And really, I think most people who will be this next year, or who have been in the past, that do not end up being successful, they have stopped at the what. Mm-hmm. The what is what they stopped at. Like, facts, I gave you the facts of what happened, right? It's not enough. We need to move to the how. We need to get down to the why, because when you're talking about the why, that is where admissions sees you and your personality, and where they can assess if they think that personality is going to be a good fit for their program. So if you stop before you get to the why, you're not allowing them to see enough of you for them to make a decision about accepting you, right? So it can be really uncomfortable to get down to the why part. That can be uncomfortable. It requires you to kind of open yourself up and take some risks, honestly, right? Expose yourself a little bit. But that is required if you want the program to understand your value beyond just what's on the page, because realistically, there are going to be many other applicants that look better on the page, and that's not what matters. It's you and your personality and your processing that the program is looking for. So got to get all the way down to the why to be able to show that.
It's the critical thinking, the reflection. Mm-hmm. I really like that why of looking at, I think when I had done a couple summers shadowing, and I would get to the point of like, okay, you're just getting, at the beginning, you're like, okay, this is how it works. This is what they do, right? And then eventually I'd question them on things. And I love when students question me on things, because sometimes they'll call me out on something. And I'm like, you're right, I should do that. Or I didn't do that. And whatever it is. And it's like, you're really getting it. And I get excited over like me making a mistake when they figure it out. I'm like, you got it, So I think that's something that's so important, and such an easy, like you guys explained it beautifully. But for me to crudely bring it down to one word, why? Like, ask yourself that question as you're going through. Don't forget to help us defend our title as the best science and medicine podcast. Go to podcastawards.com and select DNA Today in the science and medicine category. And here's a bonus. If you tweet or post that you nominated DNA Today, and of course tag us, then we will share your post and give you a shout out on the show as a thank you. Again, that's podcastawards.com, DNA Today for the science medicine category. You have the power to get DNA Today nominated again, so please go nominate us. I'm begging you. Podcastawards.com. For more information about today's episode, visit DNApodcast.com, where you can also stream all episodes of the show. We encourage your questions, comments, guest pitches, and ideas. Send them all into info@DNApodcast.com. Search DNA Today on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, so you can connect with us there. And a favor, please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This truly helps us climb the charts and allow more genetic nerds like yourself to find the show. DNA Today is hosted and produced by myself, Keir Deneen. Our social media lead is Corinne Merlino. Our video lead is Amanda Andrioli. Thanks for listening, and join us next time to discover new advances in the world of genetics.
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA.